Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a massive geopolitical mystery, one that is fundamentally reshaping the modern world right before our eyes. You see, for 76 years, the safety of an entire continent has rested on a single, invisible American promise made in another language, literally 3,000 miles away. But what happens when that reliance is suddenly called into question?
Think about it. For 76 years, one hand held the button. Whose hand holds it now? If the American hand lets go of that nuclear button, Europe has to scramble to figure out who catches it. This is the fascinating and, honestly, somewhat terrifying story of a continent reaching for a smaller umbrella in the shadow of a much larger storm.
Section 1. The Original Promise. The Invisible Umbrella since 1949.
Okay, let's dive right into this. To really understand the profound anxiety rippling through European capitals today, we've got to look back to 1949 and the foundation of NATO. The unspoken engine of this entire alliance was something called extended deterrence. That's the U.S. commitment to risk its own cities and use its own nuclear arsenal to protect its European allies. Deterrence isn't just about having weapons, right? It's about the absolute certainty in an adversary's mind that those weapons will actually be used. This invisible, enormous, and entirely free gift allowed Germany to rebuild, smaller nations to skip building the bomb entirely, and the whole continent to pour its wealth into prosperity instead of missiles.
Section 2. The Umbrella Flickers, a political trigger in 2025.
Well, that long-standing certainty flickered in January 2025. That's when President Trump returned to the White House and floated the idea of a NATO without the United States inside it, a possibility that would have been completely unthinkable to even voice out loud just a decade ago. Now, this sparked a massive divide in how the shift was viewed. On one side, we have the argument for burden sharing. This is the perspective which has been held by U.S. leaders across both parties for years, that Europe leans way too heavily on Washington and wealthy allies must finally carry their own weight, treating the American guarantee as a favor rather than some permanent entitlement. On the other side, we see the view of abandonment, the really deep fear that a permanent security guarantee is just being abruptly withdrawn. But regardless of which side of this debate you fall on, the practical effect was identical. European planners realized the one assumption they had literally never questioned, desperately needed a backup plan.
Section 3. The French Plan B. Macron's historic offer.
When Europe began quietly looking for an answer, it spoke French, which is unsurprising really, because France has always been the continent's stubborn exception regarding defense. They built a force frappe, their totally independent nuclear deterrent, precisely so they would never have to depend on anyone else. For generations, this shield was strictly for France. But in March 2026, President Emmanuel Macron opened a door that had been sealed tight for decades by offering to stretch this very deterrent over his neighbors.
So the crucial point is what Macron actually proposed. He announced discussions to extend the French deterrent to European partners and signaled a real expansion of the French nuclear warhead stockpile. But crucially, this was a proposed process. It wasn't a signed treaty or a finished shield. The historical taboo had absolutely been broken, but the shield itself was far from forged.
Section 4. The Quiet Rooms, Drafting a European Shield. While the big public announcements grabbed all the headlines, the actual drafting of a European shield happened totally out of sight. Just look at how rapidly this escalated behind closed doors. Starting in July 2025, the UK and France, which are Europe's only two nuclear states, agreed on a framework for closer coordination. By February 2026, confidential deterrence talks between German Chancellor Friedrich Merz and President Macron were reported. It was this careful, very private groundwork between atomic powers that paved the exact path for Macron's public announcement in March. During those confidential talks, Berlin and Paris did find common ground, but it came with some strict conditions. They agreed that the French deterrent must complement and not replace the U.S. umbrella. Furthermore, it had to apply equally to every European NATO member, not just a favored few. This distinction was absolutely critical to making the plan viable across such a diverse continent. And as this framework took shape, we saw growing, totally unprecedented European support. Germany signaled its willingness to participate. Belgium and Poland went even further, offering actual funding. Pause and think about that for a second. This is a stunning, unprecedented reality. Non-nuclear nations offering to help pay for another nation's nuclear force. It really underscores just how seriously Europe was taking this shift.
Section 5. The Math of Fear. The Mathematical Reality.
But look, diplomatic enthusiasm and funding only go so far. Because at the end of the day, deterrence is a numbers game. And this brilliantly illustrates the massive, undeniable hurdle for Europe.
Analysts caution that France's arsenal sits at roughly 290 to 300 warheads. Now compare that to the US strategic arsenal, which is so massive it literally dwarfs the French supply. Even if you add the British warheads into the mix, the combined European total is just a tiny fraction of the American shield. This isn't just a rounding error, folks. It's a staggering order of magnitude gap.
Scale is only the first doubt, though. The deeper one is purely philosophical. Would Paris risk Paris for Warsaw? France's entire nuclear doctrine is built completely around sovereignty. The French president holds sole sovereign command and decides when to use the weapon in defense of France's vital interests. The chilling question analysts are asking is whether a French leader would truly trade their own destruction for a city they don't even govern.
This leaves us looking at two deeply opposed views on how to move forward. Skeptics argue that credibility simply cannot transfer. Because of those massive issues of sovereignty and scale we just talked about, they believe the French bomb can only ever complement the US umbrella, never replace it. Paris, however, views this entirely differently. They frame this offer as the ultimate foundation for European strategic autonomy, a self-reliant continent finally standing on its own 2 feet.
Section 6. A continent at crossroads, 3 paths forward.
Europe now faces an unexpected threshold. Let's move to and see how this builds, because there are 3 distinct possible futures laid out before it. Path 1. The U.S. guarantee holds firm, and this entire French Plan B is quietly filed away as a strange historical footnote. Path 2. The American umbrella keeps flickering, and this French-led deterrent actually becomes the permanent scaffolding for a genuinely self-reliant Europe. And Path 3, the darker path that skeptics fear, the arithmetic proves too difficult, and Europe discovers that a smaller umbrella simply fails to keep out a larger storm.
No matter which path eventually opens up, the reality of the present moment is captured perfectly in this powerful quote. For the first time in 3 generations, Europe is being asked to imagine its own defense in a language other than English. That statement really highlights the monumental psychological and strategic shift that occurred in 2026. The taboos are broken, the weapons are real, and the doubts are very, very real.
Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought to ponder. Once a continent asks if the umbrella is still there, can it ever simply assume it is again? 76 years of sleeping beneath the promise has ended, and reaching for their own button has changed the geopolitics of Europe permanently. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. If you want to keep learning and unpacking these unbelievably complex topics, make sure you subscribe to Objective Analyst for more clear, non-partisan breakdowns of the forces shaping our world. Keep learning, and I'll see you next time.